Abstract. The purpose of this research is to be used in shaping state pedagogical policies and affect attitudinal change towards English use. Another purpose for this research is to improve creative expression in English. Design, methodology, and approach. The research was conducted online. Methodology, it was a qualitative research. Most qualitative research articles like mine will be divided into 4 major parts: the front end, the methods, the findings, and the back end. It's an original research because I conducted it using my own data. I haven't borrowed any data from anyone else. Where I have used terminologies that are used by linguists, and those sources would be cited.
Sometimes like all you want to do is run. Hear me out, hear me out. It's all the things you never show. There are the things I want to know. Secrets start in your heart so slow. But if you don't wanna tell me now, I guess I'll never know. Losing almost all my energy. It's getting hard to talk to you, and I'm the only one who speaks. It's all the things you never show. There are the things I want to know. Secrets start in your heart so slow. But if you don't wanna tell me now, I guess I'll never know. Here we go, turning all the wrongs into rights. Here we go, you can take me there tonight. Whoa, this life is all we know. Whoa, I can't stay if you can't let it go. I never really know what's going on. And even when you're next to me, I feel like you were gone. It's all the things you never show. There are the things I want to know. Secrets start in your heart so slow. But if you don't wanna tell me now, I guess I'll never know. But if you don't wanna tell me now, I guess I'll never know.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that whatever you've been up to today that it's been productive. Ladies and gentlemen, so during the course of the research, I was particularly struck at how certain words are overused. I have discussed that under common usage. One word that was overused by creatives from Sierra Leone, which is Focus Group English 001, was the adjective needful. I concerned myself with how needful entered the discourse in Sierra Leone. That's to say, how did it enter the vocabulary of this creative person that's now used in the poem or the story? And I then went on Twitter, which is now X, and also I watched Sierra Leone news stations, Sierra Leone media outlets, and I observed that needful was used a lot by politicians. So I assumed that the adjective needful was introduced into these creatives' vocabulary by the educated elite, in this case maybe politicians. Another word that was commonly used in subgroup 001, which is Sierra Leone, was the adverb severely. I have looked at the meanings of severely, and I thought that maybe this was not the word that the creators wanted to use. But this is an example where a word is in circulation, where it is profusely, and the meaning that it probably has in another language community, for example, English-speaking community here, is probably not the meaning that it has in their community. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this presentation on the research topic, Ethnolinguistic Factors Affecting Proficiency in English Language in Two Sub-Saharan Nations. So, I have looked at two nations, two countries, and they have been my focus groups for this research. What is the topic? The topic is Ethnolinguistic Factors Affecting Proficiency in English Language. What does that mean? Ethnolinguistics is a branch of anthropological linguistics that looks at how behavior affects language use. In simple English, I just want to look at how our behaviors towards a particular language affects our proficiency in it. Can I at this point saying I'm not talking about bad behavior, and nothing that I say is going to be demeaning. All that I want to do is, as an outsider, take a look at how language, in particular English language, is used in two countries. I'd like to give a brief history of how English arrived in sub-Saharan Africa, in particular in Sierra Leone and Malawi, which were the two subgroups that were selected. English came to Africa in three major ways. First of all, it was through trade contacts along the West African coast, which occurred around 15th century. So around the 15th century onwards, we saw an emergence of what we now know as Englishes in West Africa. I'm going to use the linguistic term Englishes to refer to different variations in English in the countries that are within the sub-region. Another mode through which English arrived in West and Southern Africa was through a settler population, especially in Southern Africa, in South Africa, where settlement started in the early 19th century in countries like Zimbabwe and in East Africa, Kenya, and in South Africa. And that spread to countries like Malawi, Zambia, and Uganda. In West Africa, particularly in Sierra Leone, a method that English arrived through was through when freed slaves were deported to Sierra Leone. Resettled slaves in Sierra Leone and even in Liberia, they developed their own varieties of English. And I'm from Sierra Leone. That gave rise to what we know as Creole, which is a language derived from English predominantly, though it also has Portuguese, French, and Yoruba words. For the purpose of this research, we want to look at English. So the Creole in Sierra Leone then spread to Nigeria, especially through the back and forward movements of the Yoruba group. And in Nigeria gave rise to Pidgin. It spread to Ghana and to the Gambia. So along the West African coast you have Pidgin, but in Sierra Leone it's a fully developed language and it's a Creole. So colonization was another means through which English arrived in Malawi and in Sierra Leone. Both countries were colonized by Britain, and English became the official language in Sierra Leone and in Malawi. Official language is a high status language. We'll look at high status languages in a minute. So initially, when English arrived in Malawi and Sierra Leone, only a small elite group used to speak it. In Sierra Leone, they became known as the Creoles because there were Creole speakers, and Creole was a derivative of English. In Malawi, it mostly became the educated elites, and it soon became an official language, whereas we have in Malawi and in Sierra Leone. Now, English occupies a high status. When you say a language occupies a high status, it means, for instance, if I went to a court in Malawi, I'd be expected to speak English. If I went to a university in Sierra Leone, I would be taught in English, except if I was learning another language. Proficiency in English developed in countries like Malawi and Sierra Leone because it was taught in schools. So if you are educated in Malawi or in Sierra Leone from a very early age, you're going to be taught English. In Malawi, there's also Chichewa, which also occupies a high status. In comparison, English occupies a higher status. When I talk of a high status language, I'm not being prejudiced. I'm talking about the clout that is given to the language, often by state actors like the government, pedagogical organizations like schools, civil societies. So they give English a high status in countries like Malawi and Sierra Leone. Any comparison of where English is used and in Malawi and Sierra Leone is quite an interesting one. And so I thought this research will have quite interesting findings. When I finished it, what I came up with was not what I expected, and you would see. So English is used in schools in Malawi and it's used in government on government premises, and similarly so in Sierra Leone. How is English used in Sierra Leone and Malawi today? In the two selected countries, which are going to be known as subgroup. What are the subgroups? W and P. We'll get to that. English is, as stated, an official language. It's used for pedagogical purposes, entertainment, social interactions, such as communications on social media. So, what are the factors that I was looking at when I conducted this research? I was looking at ethnolinguistic issues, such as common usage of some words, mispronunciations, influence of local dialects on English, shared vocabulary, and the absence of a reading culture. The research topic again was ethnolinguistic factors affecting proficiency in English language in two sub-Saharan nations. I have named them here. When the research goes up on my website, the countries will not be named. During this ethnolinguistic research, I extensively interacted with two subgroups to decipher how ethnolinguistic factors, patterns of behavior, affect proficiency in the use of English. How was data collected? Data collection method, observations, documenting what I saw, heard, or encountered in detailed field notes. Interviews by asking followers questions in one-on-one conversations. Focus groups, asking questions and generating discussion among a group of people, often online on Facebook. Surveys, distributing questionnaires on Facebook with open-ended questions, and conducting writing competitions or spoken word events. Are you enjoying the presentation? I hope you are. This is a teaching platform, so I am assuming that some of you might have to do research for your universities, and I have undertaken a qualitative research, and there is another kind of research called quantitative that deals more with numbers and statistics. Because I was looking at how people wrote and I was looking at how they spoke, I did a qualitative research and I have analysed their poems, stories, and comments. I want to give a summary of how the data was collected. Data collection methods. First of all, my sample groups. I had focus group English 001, which corresponds to Sierra Leone. That is going to be anonymized, and in the research that's posted on my page, they will be known as focus group English 001. My other focus group was English 002, which is Malawi. Why do people anonymize research groups? It's for confidentiality purposes. Also, in my qualitative research, I did have an age range, just the age bracket of who I looked at. And the age range was people between the ages of 18 and 54. What was my mode of experiment for my research? I did an online research on social media namely Facebook and Twitter, which is now X. Methodology, that's another word you might hear in research. My methodology. How did I go about doing my research? What was the process? I analyzed poetry, short stories, and Facebook comments on my feed. Duration, the length, duration of research. Mine was a longitudinal survey. Longitudinal research would be one that has gone on for over a year, according to British standards. I don't know what standards you have in your country. I've got to be careful. So when we talk about longitudinal research, it should have gone on for longer than 12 months here. The duration of my research was from March 2022 to December 2023. Not all of my focus groups were studied for that amount of time. The longest studied group was Sierra Leone, and that was for 18 months. Malawi was a short survey, and it went on for 10 months. You might have had me say I had a control group, which was Nigeria, and that I said it was an intermittent survey and that it lasted for 6 months. Why did I do this research? Research is good to inform policymakers, and it's good for us to learn from research. Because I had so many writers and creatives from different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, we might see that as an asset in this country. An asset means you have something that is valuable. So when my research is done and it's gone on my page, it might be maybe an organization here in Britain might read the findings. They might help, people who live in those countries. It might be that your state organizations, especially pedagogical organizations, those are involved in teaching, especially teaching English, might be interested in what I have found. I have found that there is a pattern in language use in the two countries that were studied, which I'm going to name here because it's Facebook, and the countries are Sierra Leone and Malawi. I have looked at ethnolinguistic issues. Ethnolinguistics has to do with behavioral patterns, and ethnolinguistics here was looking at how language is used by a certain group. Mispronunciations are common because you're copying someone else how they say a word. For example, I looked at how Sierra Leoneans are saying social media instead of social media. And that's obviously because they had someone say social media. In Malawi, people say lighter. I'm a Malawian lighter. I'm a lighter instead of saying I'm a writer. So someone like a doctor would say I'm a writer, but another person might say I'm a lighter. I'm a lighter. So I want to look at why some groups in Malawi are saying lighter instead of writer. It may be who have copied someone's pronunciation. And research like this is good because I have found out that a large group of people in Sierra Leone do not know how to coordinate the subject and the verb. And the reason why I do it is to enable people who have the means to help the groups that I have mentioned. They might enable you with the process of learning. I have also found out something good from the research, which is that those respondents that spend a considerable time reading and watching major news outlets such as the BBC and CNN, their English is much more proficient. So I have found out that there are factors that contribute to proficiency in the subgroups.
Social media is toxic in Sierra Leone.
Secondary research, collecting existing data in the form of texts, audio and video recordings which are sent to myself via WhatsApp. I'm going to be using data codes, and the data codes I'm going to be using are 1. Stagnation of language, recycled expressions, and By stagnation of language, I meant when there is no free flow, when the inflow of new words stops. How does a community group use English, recycling the words already in that community, if new words entering that community are limited? Does the language become stagnant and do some expressions become overused? Recycling means people using the same words over and over in different settings, English words. Random questions were posed at the end of the research. At the end of the research, just because I wanted to see whether my conclusions were accurate, I did post questions on Facebook. And the question posed were 1. How use English language passively? Example at work, university, creative writing, or reading. A value was accorded. A numerical value of 1 was accorded based on the respondents' amount of time spent using English. Where it exceeded 4 hours, respondents were accorded a value of 1. Below 4 hours, they were accorded a value of 0 or negligible. Question number 2. How long in any given 24-hour period do you use English? Say you wait for 12 hours. During that time frame, how long do you use the language? Example, 45 minutes. The value accorded was 1, for when that exceeded 4 hours, and 0 for when it was below that. Question number 3. Do you watch or listen to the BBC, CNN, or any other major English-speaking outlet? Value assigned was 1 for when that was yes, and no for when it was the negative response was no, I don't. It was 0 or negligible. Question number 4. What year was the last book or magazine you read published? Value assigned was 1 when it was published from 2000 to date. Before 2000, value accorded was 0. So that was just my post-research questions to check that my findings were valid. And that's still ongoing. So the questions are still on my page and the respondents are still replying to those questions. So, who were the groups selected? The 2 focus groups were 1, Sierra Leone, Malawi, English 002, and Sierra Leone, English 001. And those countries will be anonymized. One issue that struck me when I was doing the research was, how do subjects use English in creative writing? So that's why I started doing this research, because I wondered why they were using English the way they were. And so that brought me to the issue of how English enters that speaker's or user's vocabulary. How does English enter that person's vocabulary that they're going to use the word in creative expression when they're speaking a poem or when they're writing a poem, or when they're writing a story or book. Creative expression. I wondered how language, new vocabulary, new words in English enter the communities that I studied. So, for that, I did a bit of background reading, and I also relied on prior knowledge. So, the inflow of English language into the two communities studied, namely Sierra Leone and Malawi, is basically through similar methods. One is through the educated elites. So educated elites, they go abroad to England or America or Canada or Australia and study, and maybe they come back to take up high positions in their country. Maybe they're lawyers, doctors, politicians. The educated elites bring new words into the flow of language in the country. In this particular case, we're looking at English. Say, for instance, I studied in England and then I went back to teach in Sierra Leone. I might bring the expression shepherd's pie. I'm going to be looking at shepherd's pie in a minute. Tourism. There isn't a lot of tourism in Sierra Leone. Tourism is picking up a little bit in Malawi, but it's not on such a big scale as you have in Kenya and South Africa. So tourists might bring new words. Trade. When you trade with countries, you use words that they understand, and they use words you understand. They bring in new words, especially through commerce. You might have a lot of jargon introduced from commerce. There isn't a lot of trade going on in Sierra Leone. In Malawi, there's a tobacco trade. Is it still flourishing? Tell me, I don't know. Media. So, the media is responsible for circulating information in a particular language, and a lot of people learn English words from the media. In Sierra Leone, Creole is now used profusely. In Malawi, Chichewa is used profusely as well. So, how many new words and how many fresh expressions and how much is English used in the media in Malawi to the extent where young people, I shouldn't say young people, where speakers of English in those countries acquire new vocabulary or polish the vocabulary they have? Social interaction. So you come on Facebook, you might interact with myself, you might interact with a page like the BBC, or you might interact with a writer from your country. You might want to communicate with a news channel. Reading English books. So those are the methods through which English enters the studied communities. Educated elites, tourism, trade, media, social interactions, and through reading. I've got a lot of papers, haven't I? So what did I find out? I'm going to use the example of a word that is borrowed from the Bible but is now used in poetry. So a person referred to as butterfly, anonymized as butterfly, they sent me a poem. The poem had a lot of religious innuendos, a lot of religious language borrowed from the Bible. A person anonymized as Y sent me a story, and the story had a lot of religious undertones. So, in a country like the subgroup 002 Malawi, for instance, creative writers are using a lot of Christian expression in their work. That's because of the stagnation of language. So, what happens is, say I go to church and I'm going to pick up a new vocabulary from my pastor. I go to a youth group, I'm going to use it there. Another person in the youth group is going to borrow that expression, they might use it in a poem. I might take it to my school because language is shared. So that's the way the word is going to move around in your community. And when a young person or a person who wants to express themselves creatively in the language, once you use a word, it's more likely that from the finite expression that they have, they're going to borrow a biblical expression because that's what they have. So language is stagnant where the words are entering this learner or the speaker's vocabulary as ones in circulation already. They're not reading books to bring in new words into their own vocabulary. They're not interacting a lot with pages like teaching pages, maybe like mine, and they're not interacting with other English speaking um, outlets. So therefore, they're going to use words that are already in circulation. I want to look at how that affects proficiency because writers are expected to demonstrate a high proficiency in the language of choice. Here, the language is English. In subgroup 01, which is Sierra Leone and which we anonymized, I noticed from reading their poetry, short stories, and Facebook comments that one pattern emerged. They were experiencing difficulties using subject verb coordination. What do I mean? In the present simple tense, we'll say, she knows how to cook cassava leaves. Joseph sings beautifully. However, in subgroup English 001, there were problems coordinating subject and verb, especially the number rule. So you might see mistakes like I would say she know, Joseph know, President Bill leave without the S. That might also have to do with ethnolinguistic factors like the influence of Creole on English. In Creole, we say I know, I see. We don't say I sees, I knows, because there's no S in the present, third person singular. I've got some samples which I'm going to post for you to have a read. So to summarize this, because it's only for Facebook, much more detailed research is going to go on my website. My data was collected without intervention. I did not say when speakers were using the language, I did not say, don't write that, don't speak like that. They sent me their material. So I did not intervene in the data that was collected. Again, my sample groups were focus group English 01 Sierra Leone, and I studied 180 subjects. And that began in March 2022 and ended in December 2023. It's a survey, longitudinal survey, and it lasted for about 18 months. Subject group 002, my focus group, which was Malawi, was studied for 10 months from March to December. I then had a control group. The control group was where I was looking at random variables to compare with my two subgroups. The control group was Nigeria, and intermittently Nigeria was surveyed for 6 months, and the sample from Nigeria was 55 samples. I concerned myself with how other languages that speakers use in Sierra Leone and Malawi influences their perception or their thought processes when they come to creatively express themselves in English. Are these cultural patterns? On my website, I'm going to be including what Humboldt and Hader said. You don't need that here. So, what are the takeaway points? The takeaway points are that where English stagnates, where there is an absence of reading, and where individuals are not interacting with media outlets such as BBC or CNN as much, and where other languages are used, language tends to stagnate and creative expression is negatively affected. It depreciates. I did mention the example of shepherd's pie. Say I went on holiday in Sierra Leone and they offered me a meat dish, and I don't know what it is. I might say it looks like shepherd's pie. The waiter or waitress or the shop owner might add that to their menu. So maybe another tourist, someone else might come and they might offer them shepherd's pie. Shepherd's pie might then become a new expression that's introduced into the circulation of language. And similarly, so that's what happens with reading. So when you read contemporary books, contemporary poems, and when you interact like with the BBC or CNN or a page like this, what's going to happen is you're going to inject new words into your vocabulary. And because language is shared, you're going to pass that expression around. It's not just vocabulary, it's also phraseology. How I phrase my sentences is probably different from how you phrase yours. And this is how we would interject lifeblood into the English that's circulating in these communities. I hope you understood that. A comprehensive item is going to go on my website. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.